One is accountability and one is history, and in a way the merger of the two, the accountability of history. And those are really tough things to do in this culture, which is a culture of now and the near future, and there is no past. Past is a series of nostalgic products to buy, TV shows to watch, but that's it. And there is no sense of living history, and that there's a continuity to our own activities politically or socially. And people who run organizations like the Bike Coalition have, the people who run the organization have a vested interest in not remembering this stuff, because if they were held accountable to previous agreements and previous agendas, they don't look too good, right? But if they can continually come out and announce victory, victory, victory when they just achieved the most tepid little stupid reform. Oh, we have these little white things on the bike lane now, isn't that amazing? And it's like, well, again, yeah, it's better than it was before, sure. Better is better than worse, but so what? There's a bigger agenda to be had. But, you're bucking up against a deeper cultural issue there for the whole society. The society treats history as an epithet. It's something negative. They say to you when they want to dismiss you as irrelevant, your history, pal, as opposed to history is really important and we should be honoring it and building our lives, with accountability to what's come from the past. So, you're fighting against a deep cultural impulse in the United States to be in denial of history. That's been true for its whole life. And it's truer now than it ever has been. And that's also a product of the spectacle, as analyzed by the situationists. Where is the political movement? Where is the culture of humans who are actually organizing themselves to bring about these changes? It's not there. A lot of the people who are doing things are involved very much in this sort of narrow stuff that we were talking about earlier, showing up with their handmade signs at a public hearing because that's the form democracy is taking. And so those who do get activated feel like they need to go through the normal channels. So they don't see it as a matter of organizing outside of that logic. So if you want to create a kind of a cultural impulse, a movement of humans that might actually have the wherewithal to push for these larger transformative changes that we're talking about, it's not going to happen overnight. It just takes a while. And so you have to have radical patience, is what I like to talk about. It's like staying in the game every day, finding the connections. What are the missing pieces? Are there enough people talking to each other about these ideas? I would say not. That's actually part of the problem. Is like you and I have talked about this, and we know these ideas are easy to come up with, and they're all over the place, and they're kind of staring us in the face. But the average people in society are not talking about this kind of stuff and actually think we're crazy. We are the definition of crazy for talking about this stuff. So the things that we're talking about have to become like the common sense alternative to the crazy world we're living in. And that means we need a lot more people who are participating in the conversation, who are actually shaping that agenda. That's not just like Manu and Chris have good ideas, Janelle's got good ideas. We'll just do what they say. No, that's not the point, right? The point is that there's this conversation going on that things emerge from. And that culture doesn't exist. And a great number of people in this society are really hostile to it. Like the organized part of this society is really hostile to that kind of stuff emerging. So we have some, major cultural and social impediments and bureaucratic ones in the near term that are not going to get out of the way soon. So part of the way you framed the question earlier was, what do we do to get something moving? If I knew the answer to that, it would be moving already. I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. And I actually feel probably more isolated at this point, or as isolated as I've ever felt. And that's not an unusual experience. It's the norm. I just take it for granted. Like, okay, that's the way it's going to be. I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stop talking about the things I care about. I'm not going to start saying, let's vote for this next Democrat to win the local office. I could give a shit about that stuff. It doesn't matter to me who wins. I really genuinely don't care, because they're all the party of capital and they're all doing the wrong things. Even though some of them do something slightly better than others. I'm aware of that, but it's not enough to motivate me to participate in that process. So, what I've been doing a lot is in the realm of publishing and in the realm of creating public space for discussion. Because I feel like what needs to happen is more people need to network themselves together and then have radical, radically informed conversations from which they start to find their own power to change the world. And there's a lot of specific things that we're well aware of going on already. So the other projects that you're doing and other people are doing, whether they're urban agriculture or transportation agitation or whatever it might be. And I wrote about some of that in Nowtopia and elsewhere. And that's all to the better, those are foundational that can grow into something bigger than they are today. But there's not a lot of effort to grow them, right? People have a tendency to go inward rather than outward, so that you get involved in your garden, you get involved in your DIY bike shop, whatever it might be. And the tendency is just to put all your energy into that thing and feel like, well, at least I'm doing that. And that's right. At least you are. And that's a better thing than not having it. But what has to happen someday, somehow, is for our practical activities like that to turn into a political movement that understands that we're up against power. And we actually have to overcome that power. And that is a very serious conflict ahead. And those people kill you if they don't like what you're doing. We're not like that. We don't kill people who get in the way or we don't like. And so facing a society that is pretty loose about murder and serious destruction of human well-being in order to maintain the power is not a small problem. That we're really naive about it. We just don't even talk about it because we're so far from facing it. You know, we're irrelevant to them for the time being, and our abilities to carry on our activities are not really constricted. We can do whatever we want as long as we don't threaten them. Right? If we start threatening them, we're going to see some things are going to get ugly pretty fast. I mean, for instance, case in point is the student movement that's happening right now. With all this March 4th stuff that just went by. Well, they've had some events locally, and there's undercover cops penetrating them, and they've had a bunch of them got arrested at a party because they were, you know, set up by these cops. And, you know, COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of the FBI, is alive and well under some other name, and it's being run by Homeland Security. And we don't really deal with that. And if you talk about it, you sound like, well, you're paranoid, man. You know, for an average bicyclist who has got just a middle-class life and rides their bike and wishes there was a little more space to ride their bike, they don't think about all this radical political stuff. They don't think about the implications of that. They don't really want to, a lot of them. And if you talk about some of these, the implications of going to a moment of real cultural war, where we're like trying to create a different way of life, and the people who are trying to maintain things as they are will start to kill us, or put us in jail, or do what they can to smash our efforts. You know, we have to be ready for that at some point. But there's no reason to make that the defining characteristic of what we're doing yet, you know, but it's just a part of being less naive than we might be otherwise. So I think the long-term prognosis is that you have to grow enough of a culture that knows each other and trusts each other to have difficult discussions and arguments, which we actually also have a culture in Northern California that's very uncomfortable with arguing. Oh, if you're arguing, that's bad vibes, man. Kind of get with the program, try to be nicer. And I'm just not into that, you know. It's like I want to argue. I want to argue in public. There's a lot of things to argue about, a lot. And so we have a culture that's essentially self-retarding in that respect. And it's philosophically and politically really kind of a pale shadow of what it might be. And you know, my friends in the student scene, including my daughter and my ex-partner, are adamant that this moment that they're living through right now around the UC movement and other occupational movements going on in other campuses in other parts of the country, what's really at stake for them is to try to create a rupture in capitalist time and space, a rupture from which they're not returning. And I'm like, really? Sounds so nice, but what does that even mean? You know, like suppose you succeeded at creating that rupture. Like maybe you could say that happened when they occupied Wheeler Hall for 4 days. The people there were in a different time and space experience than the normal capitalist life. That's true. It's very important for your imagination to taste that thing. Critical mass is like that most of the time for a lot of the people, without even using that language. It just changes your imagination about what's possible. But how do you take that and generalize it? How do you actually, what's your industrial policy coming out of that rupture? How are you going to actually have, you know, the things you need? Milk. Fill in the blank. There's a million things that we need. So there's a long way to go from here to there, and the there is starting to have more people talking about it. That's a good thing. But the steps from here to there are really a zillion of them, and most of them are unclear because, you know, there's a tendency to dismiss things like getting a bike lane on the Bay Bridge. It's like, who cares? It's just a minor reform. But no, it actually would be better because then more people will be bicycling. They'll be talking to each other on their bikes, meeting each other on the bridge, meeting each other on either side of the bridge, commuting together. You know, it creates more social life, more networking and conviviality. So whenever there's something like that, I'm in favor of it. But how do you get these bureaucrats to get out of the way? Well, that's not an easy problem. I don't know what the answer is to that.